As a science teacher, one of the things I did in astronomy is discuss with the students how we give names to different directions. I'd give them compass roses, and depending on age level, they could color them in. We might talk about how we give names to azimuth headings or bearings. And specifically for astronomy, I wanted them to understand how the sun moves through the sky with the various seasons, so we would add to the compass roses markings for solstices and equinoxes, making sort of a paper version of Stonehenge, or a paper equivalent of the markings they might have at an observatory. So the arrows on the eastern and western sides of the compass rose indicate the directions of sunrise and sunset in the various seasons. For example, today, the day that I'm filming, is about a day from the equinox, in which case the sunrise is due east, or over there. The sun just came up today and it's rising due east. As spring passes into summer, the sunrise will shift more and more towards the north until it reaches a northerly extreme on the day of the summer solstice, in which case it will rise over there. In the middle of summer, the sun will not rise over there, but over there. As summer passes back to winter, it will pass through the fall equinox, and the sunrise will shift more and more towards the south until it reaches a southerly extreme on the day of the winter solstice, in which case it will rise over there instead of over there. So this set of arrows shows the range on the horizon of the sunrise in the various seasons. So after I finished creating this design on paper, this compass rose with the solstice and equinox markings for sunrise and sunset on the two sides, I thought this might make a really beautiful design engraved into wood. So I started doing some experiments. I started with a coaster-sized version. I said there's space at the top and bottom, so maybe I can add a location label at the bottom with latitude and longitude markings, and it might make a very pretty coaster. So these are a couple examples of what I made of coaster versions of my solstice roses. They're just lightly engraved with the laser in the surface, and then on higher power you cut out the circle, a little light sanding and a little coating with poly or varnish of some kind, and you get a nice little decoration, pretty little coaster. These two particular examples, by the way, I chose as an example of something right on the equator and something far into the southern hemisphere. You'll notice when you're right on the equator, the solstice arrows are very close together. And then in the southern hemisphere, I chose the Falkland Islands as an example of a place that's far into the southern hemisphere. And you'll notice there, not only are the solstice arrows much farther apart, but I also had to reverse the seasons. The sun rises and sets very far to the north in winter, and rises and sets very far to the south in summer, because the seasons are reversed in the southern hemisphere. I also thought, well, maybe I could interest coffee shops in a set of coasters with personalized labels on them, so I tried a few different versions for different coffee shops. These are a couple of my favorite. I also thought, why don't I try engraving a hole in the top? While I'm cutting it out, I could just cut out a little hole as well, and then pass a little ribbon through it and make a nice little Christmas ornament. So that's a Christmas ornament version of the compass rose that I made. Also, just for the heck of it, I decided to try foreign languages and a Cyrillic alphabet just to see if I could do it. So these are a couple examples of foreign cities that I tried. By the way, notice that St. Petersburg, Russia, it's so far to the north, it's almost near the Arctic Circle. The solstice arrows are so far apart, they're almost to the northern and southern horizons. I also tried a few experiments in acrylic. If I just engrave the design straight into acrylic without doing anything else, it does sparkle very nicely when it's side lit, but otherwise it really doesn't show up and it's not very vivid or very pretty. I tried giving it a darker backing, hoping that would make the design pop a little better, but that's really hard to get the two layers to fuse together and make the empty areas beautiful, crystal clear without muddling up the engravings. I also thought maybe could I put a map underneath? Could I make a compass rose for a certain location and then have it overset over a map? So I worked out how to print satellite maps of different locations, but I really don't have a good way to combine the two. You can't really see the design clearly and the map clearly at the same time. I also tried color fill, trying to get acrylic paint into the grooves that the engraver leaves behind. That can be very pretty, but it depends hugely on what kind of background you have. If you have white paint, it shows up beautifully against a dark background, but is very ugly against a light colored background. If you have dark paint, it shows up very beautifully against light colored or white backgrounds, but is very faint and unappealing against dark backgrounds. I also thought the compass rose design might look nice on larger plaques to commemorate or to mark particular locations, so I expanded the design and tried engraving it on larger wooden discs, and I added months. I added a calendar between the solstice markers to indicate where the sun will rise or set in each given month. I'm fairly pleased with these, but my big problem is how to finish them. These are wooden and probably wouldn't hold up very well if they were permanently mounted in the ground or outdoors anywhere. So for the time being, these are mostly just decorative. I did try coating one with epoxy rosin. It did make a nice hard, smooth, crystal clear coating, but it's really hard to get it applied smoothly on the edges. I have drip problems on the bottom, and I've never tried it, but I also hear that if you put these outdoors, it will yellow and crack very easily. So it still isn't a very good solution for how to permanently mount these outdoors. So ideally, I think this design needs to be in masonry if it's going to be permanently mounted outdoors. So I've toyed around with trying to engrave it into tiles, into ceramic tiles, and then color filling the engraving to make it stand out, but without a whole lot of luck so far. If I could find a way of carving individual tiles into the right shape and then adding them up into the composite pattern, that would make a really nice tile design in the ground, I would think. But I haven't figured out how to do that yet.